Yes, but let's forget about it for a bit. But you managed to make the car with the console. Dear friends, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to see and explore in detail, or at least as much as possible, the newer DTJ-RX3 device. One of the most accessible compact models, even in terms of price, more or less. I mean, we're still talking about a device that even today is worth around 2,000 euros or a little less. And basically for DJs who, for example, like me, sometimes find themselves having to bring their own setup, well, this really saves you the hassle of having to carry separate mixers and controllers. If you want to add, say, a turntable, nothing stops you from doing that. This is a console that still offers a great number of connections and so on, but now we're going to break it all down, starting precisely with this, the connections that this console offers. I'd say we can start right away with the outputs of our console. In this case, we have two Master 1 outputs with the classic XLR jacks that we all know very well by now, so standard balanced outputs with XLR connectors, which in my case are plugged directly into the mixer, which is basically my home mixer. Here at this point we have a second master output, Master 3, which is a copy of the Master 1 output that becomes Master 2. In this case I'm using it to connect to my audio interface so I can record my voice, because in fact I'm using this console, as we can see from the VU meter here and the microphone input here, to also record my voice through this microphone. Let's move over here a bit. We have two more input channels that can be switched using these switches up here, which we'll look at later. Here we have a line input and a phono input for each channel, so for the two channels on our mixer. We also have an additional AUX input, also a line input, which can be accessed through this dedicated section on the mixer. Moving further to the right, we have two additional microphone inputs, one of which is currently occupied by the microphone I showed you earlier. The microphone section can be adjusted from here, which we'll look at shortly. Here is the input for the standard power cable, and finally we have a USB port that allows us to connect our console to a PC and use it as a controller. Moving to this side, we have two headphone outputs, one 3.5mm and one 6.3mm stereo jack, both of which can be used at the same time. Here we have USB port 1 and USB port 2, which also allows you to record the master output directly onto a flash drive inserted into port 2. And with that, we've pretty much covered all the ports this console has to offer, although there's one small thing we forgot, these two cables you see here, which are simply 6.3mm mono jack. This is the stereo booth output, as we can see, the right channel in this case with the red cable, and the left channel with the white cable. It's controlled from here, the booth monitor, this knob here. In my case, it sends the signal to my monitor. It's worth mentioning, folks, that we're dealing with extremely professional equipment here. This is one of those consoles with features that everyone knows how to use because it follows established standards and formats. All things considered, we're looking at a console that could be very similar to a mixer, like the DJM450 with two channels, featuring a myriad of effects, both effects in this section and color effects over here, which we'll look at later. In addition, it has two separate CDJs, which are literally like having two CDJ-3000s. These are essentially two CDJ-3000s with a single screen. So, I'd say that first, let's analyze one CDJ, then we'll take a look at the mixer, and finally at the end, we'll go through the various settings available in the device's menu. Here we are in front of a classic CDJ. Well, classic, so to speak, where we have all the usual functions, cue, play and stop, the jog wheel and so on. Some special features on this CDJ, for example, could be the rev function to play the track in reverse, or the adjustable jog wheel, which you can turn on or off with this control here. So let's take a look at some of the typical features you find on a classic CDJ. If we press the usual play button, the track starts playing. Just a quick note, I'm placing the microphone here in toy cover mode so that whenever I speak, the volume of the track will automatically lower. So I'm going to precisely set my cue point. The truly cool and remarkable thing about this particular CDJ is that when I want to meticulously save a specific cue point, so I can play then stop, and in this specific instance, I search for the exact cue by carefully moving the jog wheel. I can also perform this action directly and conveniently from the integrated touchscreen display. I can then smoothly go back to the very beginning of the track and then meticulously fine-tune it with the jog wheel, diligently looking for the precise cue point at the very first beat. By simply pressing the cue button, I can reliably save the point exactly where I have chosen it to be. But actually, no, that didn't happen, ladies and gentlemen. Why? Because in this case, this console works with Rekordbox, which means that all the tracks on this USB stick have been pre-analyzed by Rekordbox Pioneer's software. You can see on this display all these little markers, these white and red ticks, white and red, white and red. Well, since I can't save the cue point exactly where I want, I need to turn off quantize. You turn off quantize with this little button here. We turn off quantize and now I can set my cue again, look for my first beat, and now my cue point is saved exactly where I want it, not where the computer says. Got it? It's always better to use your ears. After carefully turning off the quantize feature and diligently saving the cue point, we can also readily turn it back on to fully have all those incredibly useful features such as automatically syncing our loops, effects and so on with great precision and ease. Let's move over here to the right where we have a really long fader. It's incredibly precise. Honestly, you have no idea how precise you can be with it. I especially notice this when I connect a turntable. I usually set it up here on the right, add a third turntable, a third deck, and I connect here on phono from deck 2, which is this CDJ. I switch to phono and play with the turntables. You have no idea how much I've noticed it, just how precise this fader is. You can just barely touch it and you can really feel the difference thanks to this high Pioneer quality. Up here we have the essential master tempo feature, which effectively keeps the pitch completely unchanged regardless of the track's current speed. Let's quickly do a brief example to illustrate this. As you can clearly hear, the track noticeably speeds up and then slowly slows down, but the fundamental pitch absolutely doesn't change at all. However, if we intentionally turn off the master tempo function, not only does the overall speed change significantly, but the inherent pitch of the track changes as well, which is a crucial distinction. Above, we have the percentage of our fader, which can be plus or minus 6%, plus or minus 10%, plus or minus 16%, or wide. The cool thing you can do with wide, for example, is to use it at the beginning of a DJ set, or at least that's how I do it basically. I really like using wide for this because at the start of a DJ set, I hit play, raise the volume, and you can hear how the sound builds up. Let's also add some effects and so on. This is a cool thing about wide. It can slow the track all the way down to 0% or speed it up to 200% so it can actually double its speed. Up here we can check the jog mode, whether it's set to CDJ or vinyl, and see what changes. Right now, we are currently operating in CDJ mode, so if I gently move the jog wheel either forward or backward, even by simply touching its upper surface, it will effectively speed up or noticeably slow down the musical track by deliberately pressing the dedicated value button. Let us carefully observe what significant changes occur. Meanwhile, a sort of touch screen is activated on top of the jog wheel. As soon as I touch the jog, it stops, just like if I were stopping a vinyl record. There's also the possibility to scratch. Nevertheless, when I carefully move the jog wheel sideways without physically touching the top touchscreen part, I temporarily and incrementally increase or decrease the track's playback speed depending on whether I intentionally speed up or gradually slow down the track's progression. Still operating in vinyl mode, let's proceed to turn on this particular feature, the vinyl speed adjust on/off function. This dedicated button is exactly for that specific purpose. Now I will let you clearly hear the effect. With a simple touch, I will launch and then stop the record's playback. Let's activate the vinyl speed adjust and carefully observe what happens. This particular button simply simulates the dynamic acceleration and effective braking of the record in vinyl mode when playback is triggered on a classic traditional turntable. here we have this thing, the jog adjust. Basically, it allows us to set more or less sensitivity for fast forwarding or slowing down the track when we're beat matching and so on. Up here we have the entire loop section, featuring the classic and intuitive in and out buttons. These are used to precisely set the start and the end of the loop, the exact start point and the precise end point. It gets automatically quantized because we have the quantize function thoughtfully turned on. Here, you can easily exit the loop if you wish, or you can simply recall it by pressing the very same button again. We can effectively halve or precisely double the overall length of our loop, and using the integrated delay and memory functions, we can carefully save this particular loop and then recall it at the right moment, or indeed delete it with the delay. Everything is quite straightforward. The dedicated direction button is particularly interesting and useful because it effectively reverses both the direction and the rotation of the platter. Here on the left side of the jog wheel, we have the classic track search buttons to look for the right track within the folder, and the search button to find the right point within the track. The shift button allows us to call the functions wherever we want, like in this case with the iPad, or for example in adjust and out adjust in the loops, a function that allows you to adjust the input and output of the loops through the movement of the yoke. To give you an idea of the amount of things that can be done with the shift button, and guys, I'd say that for now we'll stop here with the CDJ, as each of these pads can have many explicit functions. You don't have the slightest idea of the amount of things that a single pad of these can do, especially this shift button. Then every time it's called by a single button, these functions. In short, there are a myriad of things to know, a very thick manual to read, that we won't see here today. In any case, this is a professional instrument that can also be rented, so it's right that it has all these things that most of the DJs in the world, I'd say, don't even know, including their use. At this point, I'd say that we can move on to the central part, that is the mixer. It's a totally digital mixer, totally digital, because the parameters that are here, for example, are, I know the qualifications of this knob here can be either 26 dB or completely isolating the low range of this channel, and this can be adjusted via the internal meter of our RX3, but we'll see about that in the future. For now, let's focus on the mixer as the last step, and then we'll analyze the menu. Let's start by seeing here where we have the possibility to decide the volume of the headphones. This is literally the headphone section, and we can decide the output volume in our headphones or basic addressing to what we want to listen to in our headphones. The most, therefore, everything from here by literally selecting what we want to listen to, our channel 1 or channel 2, or if we want to listen completely to the master, which is by default at the sound volume, we will basically be listening in the headphones what is here, or we can also give you a cue point, but it is always the monopoly here on cue, and by touching cue on the master, moving higher, we find ourselves with sound color effects. Basically, we have 6 effects that can be activated or deactivated by pressing these buttons that flash, of which we have the parameter number 1 through this super mega silver pomelo, giant, huge, awesome, wow, very soft, very sensitive is parameter 2. This here, let's do a very quick example, for example, of the filter, which is one of the most well-known effects of Pioneer, especially one of the most used effects. We have just listened to a high pass or low pass filter, while here we have a resonance, so we listen to the peak by putting it to the maximum, and we listen by putting it to the minimum in a way that cuts it. So it is a very soft cut, as we said before. Up here we have the house, so this is literally a third channel that is there, and we can pay attention to the input between house line or portable, which would be those 2 jacks that we saw before. From here we can define the input level above, also mirrored as here on the right we have the selection of the channel source, in this case of our channel number 1, where we have the deck 1 or this CDJ incorporated in the compact line console if we want to enter via the RCA that we saw before with any type of line source such as a CDJ, a jack cable for the 5 for the telephone that ends with 2 RCA and is inserted into the console, or the last oven switch allows our channel 1 to receive signal from any device that can be, for example, a turntable with a very low signal intensity, however sound by moving the mixer above. We have the usual stuff, so low, medium and high, that I won't even show you the trim to adjust the gain of each single track. In case, for example, on the turntable you have a lower gain, then you pull up the trim and here you go to make the output volume levels on the master go here in the middle. We have the type of fader, in the sense the type of cut that our crossfader makes, in my case making electronic music, especially pre-techno valve here. This selector remains on true, because I go here or I go here or I stay here or I stay here or I stay here, it makes almost no difference. The signal remains the same. And as if this fader didn't exist, we can go to the effects section where we can immediately notice the boot monitor, what I showed you before, the knob to decide the output volume of our monitors. Spy how it can be in this case our monitor of the Gamechi, articulate attention to the support printed in real. And I made a dedicated video, guys, let's go and see the bit FX section. This whole part has to do with the effects of the House of Pioneer. From here we can go and select 14 of the most used effects, even if actually I use more than anything else of her here, and reverb others edifice mente I use, or rather even more so, I only use the reverb discursively from this knob. We go to modify the parameter that we can notice here on the display, that the percentage is modified, so let's say the parameter 2 of the effect. While from here we go to open and close the effect, completely admitted and not granted that the effect is still on, because first of all you have to turn it on via this button. Let's do a little example. We have a song loaded in deck 1, so via this knob I go to select the channel on which I want the effect to act. In this case channel 1, where we have 1, 2 master, outsmith, crossfader, ba. We want via this game that our effect goes to affect the audio signal present on channel 1. So let's go to play. We turn on the volume so that you can hear it. We activate the effect, while from here we go to the parameter 2, in this case of the reverb effect, we give it, for example, 100% parameter, and we go to hear the difference compared to before. Now let's go to put the 0% of reverb, 1%, sorry, and we go to hear the difference compared to before. Practically it doesn't act a small cool thing that can be done with these two knobs, for example. What I usually do with the reverb in particular, to set it to 50% through the use of the knob time, after which before the drop go down with the percentage and then completely close the filter. I'll give you an example at this point, guys. Let's take a quick look at the menu where I want to show, regarding the mixer, a whole series of parameters that can be modified and edited, as this is a totally digital mixer to do. So let's go to press the menu button here at the top right, and here come all the settings in this. In the case of the deck, we can go down with the wheel and also go to the mixer. Let's say that both the mixer and the deck have their settings being completely programmable. Then there are a whole series of general settings, such as the language, the brightness of the screensaver, and even a whole series of glitches that we can obviously put in place at the moment. But the cool thing about this thing is that there is a little button here called shortcut that takes you directly to some very useful settings. What are these settings? Let's try pressing it. In the meantime, let's go back to the home page, press shortcut, and here we are. What does it matter? Lowering the lights, but now let's go and see the screen so that we can finally understand the quick settings through this shortcut button, which is really useful. In the meantime, let's immediately note the deck settings here. Let's start from here so we can select the type of time display that we have for our song, whether it's the reversing time or the time from which our song started playing. The time 18, the time remains. I always keep remains because it's always better to know how much is left rather than how long the song started from. Right here on the right, we find it with the car that I keep it on because it's convenient for the eye. Instead, it's that function that allows you, in case you're manipulating at a certain point by mistake, you load the track on the record that's spinning that the audience is listening to here. It tells you stop. Are you sure you want to load with the track? Look at what record is spinning this way. You save yourself many times. It happens. It happens, guys. I have no doubt. I always keep this thing in such a way that it has to ask me for permission, or at least I have to stop playback of the record and then be able to load the track here below. We have the quantized parameters. I keep it on 1 because it works very well on every single beat. Not on the medium, not on the quarter or on the octave, but on every beat immediately below. We find ourselves with some very basic things that are nothing other than the brightness of the screen, both of this display and via the yokes. As we can see, increase and decrease brightness. Here we have another setting as regards the vining speed. It's right that in this case they are turned off, which is this stuff I told you about before, as we can notice when first the on button lights up. When the off button, it also turns off on the display by moving us. Then here on the right, we basically have the mixer stuff. As I turned it on before here, we have the possibility to choose between equalization or isolator. So as our mixer shows us either equalization or isolator, so either a qualification at minus 26 decibels or isolator, or either we remove minus 26 dB or we completely give the low line of our arms. We can decide from this simple twitch here. There is the quantization of the effect that I always keep on here. There is the mixer mode in the sense if it is MIDI, therefore controlled by PC or by the compact itself. So XDJ-RX, the headphones are stereo or mono. I keep stereo. And as a last thing here, we also have the curve of our fader, or being able to decide with what emphasis the volume is increased or decreased when we move the fader of our mixer up here. As a last thing, we have based on the inserted USB, so our inserted stick of the console, the type of waveform that we want to represent on the displays. I use its classic 3-band, and it's fine. I seem so, guys, it's useless for me to tell you that this video could love going on for hours and hours and hours and hours. There are thousands, of course, to say about this console. It is also important to know the basic things, which are basically those reported in this video. If you have any doubts about these pads' functionality,